For 4 long decades, the Museveni administration has operated under the delusion that their authority was carved from unshakable granite, immune to the passage of time or the will of the people. They governed with the assumption that ruling by the barrel of a gun was sustainable, that they could silence dissent with the threat of the gulag and issue reckless threats on social media without ever facing a single ripple of diplomatic blowback. But that calculation was fatal. Today we are watching that granite foundation fracture in real time. The days of quiet backroom warnings from Washington are over. The State Department is no longer whispering polite cautions in the hallowed halls of diplomacy. Instead, the American political machine is sharpening a legal warrant that threatens to permanently sever this dynasty's grip on power. Breaking reports from Capitol Hill indicate that the United States Senate is preparing to trigger the nuclear option against the regime's heir apparent, General Muhoozi Kainerugaba. The era of handling this dictatorship with kid gloves is officially dead and buried. Following the state-sponsored siege on Bobi Wine's private residence and the gut-wrenching, tear-filled testimony delivered by his wife Barbie, a diplomatic red line has been crossed, one that cannot be erased. Make no mistake, this is not a drill or a rumor. We are witnessing a seismic shift in foreign policy. This is a diplomatic earthquake, measuring off the charts with aftershocks rolling all the way from the marble corridors of Washington, D.C. to the dusty red streets of Ouagadougou. The investigation files are wide open. The sanctions packages are drafted, and for the first time in history, the son of a sitting president is staring down the barrel of international arrest. The predator has officially become the prey. Do not avert your eyes. The events unfolding in the next few minutes of this broadcast will determine the trajectory of a nation and could salvage the dignity of an entire continent. If this story strikes a chord with your belief in justice and accountability, stick around. This is far bigger than a breaking news banner. It is a pivotal hinge in history. We need you to weigh in, hit that like button, drop a comment, or subscribe to join the conversation. It's about keeping the flame of truth burning bright against a hurricane of state-sponsored propaganda. To fully comprehend the gravity of this situation, we have to look past the legal jargon and the ink drying on these arrest warrants. This is not just a courtroom drama or a legal spat. It is a violent collision between two competing visions of Africa's future. In one corner, you have the old guard typified by the Museveni clan, where political power is treated like a family antique handed down from father to son, like a blood-soaked baton in a relay race no one else is allowed to run. In the other corner, a fierce new voice has risen from the Sahel, a voice that has transformed a local Ugandan tragedy into a global referendum on sovereignty and self-determination. Captain Ibrahim Traore has stormed onto the stage, not merely as an observer, but as a disruptive catalyst, changing the entire equation. When the news broke that Muhoozi Kainerugaba was in the crosshairs of American justice, Traore didn't join the Western victory lap. Instead, he stepped up to the microphone and delivered a blistering address that sent shockwaves rattling through the entire international diplomatic community. It was a speech that ripped the mask off the West's foreign policy, exposing the hypocritical foundations of how global powers interact with African heads of state. Traore's intervention has fundamentally altered the chemistry of this geopolitical crisis. While the US Senate gears up to invoke the Global Magnitsky Human Rights Accountability Act, a financial precision strike designed to crush the Museveni regime's wallet, Traore is asking the one question that haunts the world's conscience. Why are they acting now? Why did the international community sit on its hands for 40 years while the infamous drones, those windowless abduction vans, snatched Kampala's youth off the streets in broad daylight? Why did the West's strategic patience only run out the moment the dynasty starts to show signs of weakness? Activating the Magnitsky Act is akin to wielding a modern sword of justice specifically designed to hunt down the architects of oppression and lock them out of the global banking system. This legislation targets specific individuals, not the general population. It freezes assets held in major financial hubs like London, New York, and Frankfurt. It effectively slams the door shut on travel and commerce within the territories of the free world. For General Muhoozi, a man who uses Twitter to mock world leaders, the globe is suddenly shrinking to the size of a postage stamp. The tweeting general is about to discover that while the internet is vast, a federal prison cell is incredibly small. However, as the gears of Western legal machinery begin to grind, Ibrahim Traore reminds us that genuine justice cannot be a charitable donation from Washington. It must be harvested from African soil. The timing of this legal firestorm is anything but accidental, specifically calculated with the critical 2026 election now on the horizon. Intelligence briefings indicate there was a premeditated scheme to militarize the voting process, and the US is signaling that the road to succession cannot be paved over the bodies of the innocent. Yet Traore's provocative speech hints at a much deeper truth bubbling beneath the surface. He suggests this isn't just about arresting one man, it's about dismantling a system where African lives are traded like pawns on a geopolitical chessboard. The tension has evolved beyond a struggle between a dictator and his citizens. It is now a battle between a dying era of foreign puppet masters and the rising sun of authentic homegrown leadership. But to truly grasp the fury fueling Traore's rhetoric and the urgency behind the Senate's warrant, we have to leave the abstract world of policy papers and descend into the terrifying reality of a single night in Uganda. We have to examine the physical toll of the impunity the Museveni family thought they had purchased with their loyalty. Because long before the lawyers in DC started drafting motions, soldiers in Kampala launched a strike, and the atrocities committed inside a mother's home became the spark that ignited this global wildfire. Iwarasei. To understand why the international community has finally snapped, reaching its absolute breaking point, we need to go to the ground level. We must stand in the red dust of Magere, right at the gates of a private home that was turned into a war zone. The assault on Bobi Wine's household was not a standard police operation or a security check, it was a military invasion. This was not merely an aggressive police action. It was a calculated strategic desecration of human dignity intended to send a chilling message. According to the absolutely harrowing testimony provided by Barbie Kyagulanyi, when state security forces stormed the family compound, they arrived without search warrants, probable cause, or any semblance of the rule of law. Instead, they brought with them the overwhelming stench of cheap alcohol and the raw, unfiltered violence of a chaotic mob dressed in government uniforms. Make no mistake, this was a brutal home invasion masquerading as legitimate law enforcement, where the sanctity of a private residence was shattered by the violent splintering of wood and the deafening crash of smashing glass. Just imagine the sheer psychological terror of a mother cornered in her own living room, surrounded by armed, drunken men who answered to absolutely no authority other than their own worst impulses. Before we continue with this developing story, let us take a brief moment here, not to rush forward into the analysis, but to pause and give thanks where it is due. Go ahead and write a comment below with a simple thank you to the enduring spirit of national sovereignty, or to the immense courage of those who continue to stand firm against such overwhelming oppression. Expressing gratitude is not just a hollow formality. It is a powerful form of recognition and validation for those on the front lines. It is dignity expressed in written words. And when you add your voice of thanks, you are effectively standing in solidarity with the ongoing story of freedom, resilience, and pride. Please take this brief pause right now to comment your thank you and let your voice be heard in this digital town hall. Together, those typed words become a beacon of hope that shines far beyond the screen, illuminating the fact that the fallout from this brutality has created a political vacuum the Museveni dynasty never anticipated. For 40 years, the president had been carefully curated and viewed as a stabilizing elder statesman in East Africa, the indispensable strongman. He was marketed as a key partner in the global war on terror, but that carefully constructed mask of legitimacy has completely slipped, revealing the jagged, dangerous edges of a military junta determined to install a hereditary monarchy at any cost. The Uganda crisis has spiraled and is no longer just a domestic dispute over a ballot box or local governance. What we are witnessing is a total systemic collapse that threatens the stability of the entire region. The so-called Muhuzi Project, a transparent and brazen attempt to gift a nation of 50 million people to a son as if they were merely livestock in a personal will, has spectacularly backfired. By targeting the families of the opposition, the regime did not just create victims. They inadvertently created a massive magnifying glass that has focused the entire world's fury and attention directly onto their own moral ugliness and corruption. The consequences of these actions are now manifesting in real time as a tightening noose of financial and diplomatic strangulation. The United States Senate's aggressive move to trigger the global Magnitsky Act is a surgical strike aimed directly at the regime's offshore bank accounts and hidden assets. It specifically targets the architects of the drone campaigns and the operators of those windowless Toyota vans that have become the terrifying ghost shuttles of the Kampala gulags. These unmarked vehicles roam the city streets, snatching critics and activists into a shadowy world of safe houses and underground dungeons where the law simply does not exist. Operating under the direct command of General Muhoozi, the military has effectively mutated from a national defense force into a personal enforcement squad for the first family. But here is the reality. A dictator cannot rule by the gun alone. He desperately needs the lubrication of international currency and access to global markets. When the United States banking system slams its doors, when visas are summarily revoked, and when the threat of an Interpol red notice looms large, the world of the tweeting general begins to shrink rapidly. He essentially becomes a prisoner in his own palace, unable to travel to the very Western capitals where global power and influence reside. This is the crucial pivoting point where the narrative shifts from the chaotic streets of Kampala to the very soul of the African continent. Leaders like Ibrahim Traore have watched these events unfold with a gaze that pierces right through the veil of standard diplomatic theatre. He saw clearly the hypocrisy of a Western system that funds a repressive regime with one hand while drafting arrest warrants with the other. Traore's shocking and candid speech served as a clarion call against this perpetual cycle of dependency and foreign interference. He reminded the world that the billions of dollars poured into Uganda taxpayer money intended for schools infrastructure and medicine have instead been weaponized against the people. When the tear gas canisters are fired into peaceful crowds of protesters, we have to ask whose fuel are they burning? When the surveillance drones patrolled the night skies, who paid for the shipment, Traore's intervention stripped away the comfort of the strategic patience policy. It forced a harsh realization that stability bought at the price of mass repression is nothing more than a house built on shifting sand. The benefits of the old regime are evaporating, replaced by a terrifying paradox for the ruling elite who have grown comfortable in their power. The senior commanders in the Ugandan military now face a stark choice that will define the rest of their lives. Do they remain loyal to a fading dynasty and face international pariah status? Or do they choose to protect the institution of the army and the future of their nation? The impunity card that protected them and guaranteed their safety for 4 decades has officially expired. The symbols of their power, the tanks, the threatening tweets, the pressed uniforms are quickly becoming liabilities in a world that is finally listening to the cries of the mothers they have terrorized for so long. The era of invisible crimes is over, and the ledger of history is being balanced in real time before our very eyes. Yet as the financial walls close in and the arrest warrants are being prepared in foreign capitals, the regime is not retreating an inch. Like a wounded beast backed into a corner, it is preparing to strike back with a ferocity and desperation never seen before. The 2026 election looms like a massive storm on the horizon, and intelligence suggests that the dynasty is ready to turn the entire nation into a fortress to ensure the coronation of the son goes ahead as planned. But as the general prepares his final desperate move, a new and powerful force is rising from the shadows of oppression. This is a force that even the most advanced Western sanctions or military strategies cannot control. The true pivot of this story occurred not in a courtroom in Washington, but in the heart of a thunderous silence that followed the Senate's demand for arrest, the silence of a people ready for change. While the global diplomatic establishment prepared for the standard exchange of polite pleasantries and empty rhetoric, Ibrahim Traore commanded the stage and completely flipped the script. His mere arrival on the scene was a direct challenge to the geopolitical status quo. And while the other delegates were busy citing international statutes, Traore went straight for the moral jugular. Let's be clear, he didn't show up to provide cover for a dictator or to seek approval from Western powers. He arrived with the sole intention of dismantling the entire framework that created the crisis in Uganda. With a gaze that pierced right through the lens, he posed a fundamental inquiry that instantly dismantled the mainstream media's preferred storyline. He asked how the very architects of the oppression, those who supplied the weaponry, can suddenly masquerade as the rescuers of the victim. It was a bombshell statement that forced the world to look in a new direction. Traore zeroed in on the staggering hypocrisy of a global superpower that has propped up the Museveni administration for years. We are talking about billions of dollars in military assistance flowing for decades only. For Washington to suddenly discover a conscience about human rights the moment the regime became a political liability. This brings us to a critical junction where we need to acknowledge that your role here goes far beyond just watching a video on a screen. You are an integral piece of a growing movement that creates a firewall against having our history and our current events dictated by foreign interests. If you are ready to double down on that commitment and back the crew working around the clock to bring you this intel, hit that join button right now. Every single dollar you contribute goes straight into funding more comprehensive research, on-the-ground investigations, and unfiltered truth-telling. You aren't just tossing a coin to this platform, you are fueling a revolution in independent media. You are standing shoulder to shoulder with every sovereign leader and every citizen demanding dignity, reinforcing the absolute truth that Africa's narrative must be written by Africans. The global response to Traore's declaration was electric, sending shockwaves through the political landscape and dividing opinions sharply. Over in Kampala, the administration tried to spin the arrest warrants as some sort of badge of resistance, claiming they were bravely standing up to foreign imperialism. However, the public wasn't buying what they were selling. They saw the stark difference between a combat-tested leader like Traore, who lives in the trenches, and the elite class in Uganda. Standing in sharp contrast is General Museveni, a figure who represents the exact opposite of revolutionary struggle. We are looking at the infamous tweeting general, a man whose authority is derived entirely from his last name and a military hierarchy maintained through intimidation rather than merit. The tension is reaching a boiling point inside the barracks of the Ugandan armed forces as internal pressure continues to build. A new generation of officers witnessing the wave of Pan-African sovereignty sweeping the region is beginning to question whether they pledged loyalty to the flag or to the private bank account of one family. The Museveni dynasty is staring down the barrel of a binary future. They either implement massive reforms immediately or face total collapse. Make no mistake, the global Magnitsky sanctions are not a warning shot. They are a financial death sentence that freezes assets and destroys the ability to pay the mercenaries keeping the regime afloat. In the world of authoritarianism, loyalty is a transaction. And thanks to these economic restrictions, the cost of buying that loyalty is going through the roof. For the first time in history, the grand project to install Museveni is looking less like a royal coronation and more like the funeral march for a dying political era. Traore held up a mirror to the situation, revealing the harsh reality that a head of state who is banned from world capitals is already finished. A leader who is locked out of the SWIFT banking system and is actively pursued by international prosecutors is not a president. He is a fugitive in a suit. He becomes a massive strategic burden, and while the diplomatic heat from Washington, D.C. is significant, it is not the biggest threat. The real nightmare keeping the regime up at night is the rising pressure coming from the streets and villages across the African continent. In our hyper-connected digital era, the screams from Kampala's detention centers are heard instantly by young people in Ouagadougou, Nairobi, and Lagos. You can arrest bodies, but you cannot arrest the awakening Traore has started. The Ugandan opposition, specifically those who have been crushed under the government's boot, have stopped waiting for the West to send a rescue party. Instead, they are studying the playbook from the Sahel, adopting a philosophy where national dignity is seized through action rather than politely requested. Yet as the geopolitical winds shift, intel suggests a sinister plot is brewing deep within the presidential palace. The regime, feeling the financial noose tightening and hearing the resonance of Traore's message, is initiating a scorched earth protocol. It is becoming increasingly clear that they have absolutely no intention of handing over power peacefully. Our sources have confirmed secret meetings where the leadership decided to completely bypass the 2026 elections in favor of a permanent and violent crackdown. While the mainstream media focuses on the arrest warrant headlines, they are completely missing the dangerous maneuvers happening in the shadows. This is a calculated move designed to plunge the entire Great Lakes region into absolute anarchy before international law enforcement can make a move. To really grasp the volatility of this standoff, we have to psychologically profile the man standing at ground zero. We need to look past the unearned medals and the pristine uniform to understand the mindset of the figure driving this chaos. General Muhoozi Kainerugaba serves as a perfect case study in the dangerous effects of inherited, unchecked authority. For decades, he has operated with the arrogance of a crown prince, acting as if the laws of physics and politics simply do not apply to him. His social media behavior, erratic, aggressive, and lacking any filter, goes beyond mere posts. They are warning signs. These outbursts reveal the psyche of a ruling class that can no longer distinguish between governing a sovereign nation and managing a personal estate, mocking Western powers while dependent on their tech. He rattles his saber at neighboring countries while his own economy relies on their supply chains, but this digital bravado masks a profound emptiness. His drive isn't born from a desire to serve the public, but from a desperate, frantic need to validate a royal birthright that the citizens never agreed to sign off on. What we are witnessing on the ground right now is the so-called Mahuzi project stripped of all its diplomatic pretenses, revealing the raw, unfiltered ambition that drives it. It is a desperate, frantic scramble to demonstrate that a crown forged from bayonets and brute force can somehow balance on a head that has done absolutely nothing to earn the right to wear it. But make no mistake, the military system he commands poses a threat far more lethal than his controversial social media posts ever could. This apparatus is nothing short of a machinery of survival, meticulously engineered to treat every single civilian not as a citizen, but as a potential insurgent waiting to be neutralized. The surveillance drones that now ominously patrol the skies over Kampala are the physical hovering symbols of an administration that has completely exhausted its ability to win arguments through debate or as policy. History tells us that when a government loses the power to convince its people, it inevitably turns to kidnapping them. When it can no longer inspire hope, it resorts to projecting pure, unadulterated intimidation. The steep price of maintaining this decaying system is being paid with the shattered aspirations of an entire generation of Ugandans who are watching their futures being stockpiled and hoarded by one solitary ruling family. This is the exact systemic pathology that Captain Ibrahim Traore highlighted in his recent earth-shattering address. Traore wasn't just speaking about regional politics or borders. He was drawing a sharp, undeniable line between the calloused, hard-working hands of the labor force and the soft, manicured hands of the dynastic elite who have never known a day of struggle. He ripped the mask off the establishment, exposing the system for what it truly is, a predatory beast that must cannibalize its own children just to keep itself fed and in power. Before we go any further, take a brief moment to let us know where you are tuning in from. We want to hear from you. Drop the name of your city, your state, or the country you call home in the comments section right now. Traore Unfiltered personally reads through that feedback with immense appreciation, and we want to extend a sincere message of solidarity to every single one of you watching. We hope your personal journey is paved with dignity, resilience, and light. This broadcast is more than just a video. It is a digital town hall, a gathering of voices from around the world united by a common hunger for the unvarnished truth. The bill for decades of unchecked impunity is finally landing on the table and payment is coming due. But let's be clear, it is not just the general who will be forced to pay up. In the high-stakes, cutthroat arena of international diplomacy, there is no such thing as a clean break or collateral-free damage. The looming threat of an international arrest warrant combined with the crushing weight of Magnitsky sanctions is creating a shockwave that is shattering the comfortable bubble of the entire Ugandan political elite. Just imagine the panic of being a top-tier official who has spent 30 or 40 years siphoning off national wealth only to suddenly wake up and discover the walls closing in. Imagine finding out your credit cards are declined in London, your kids are being expelled and deported from Ivy League schools in New England, and your name has landed on a blacklist that marks you as a toxic pariah in every free nation on earth. This is the brutal psychological warfare embedded within the Global Magnitsky Act. It strikes where it hurts the most. It effectively transforms a lavish presidential palace into a gilded prison. It reduces a self-proclaimed strongman to a powerless figure who cannot even secure a travel visa for a routine medical checkup abroad. However, we have to stay grounded in the grim reality of the unfolding crisis in Uganda. For every legal victory won in the corridors of a Senate office in Washington, there is a dark, tactical countermove being plotted in the safe houses of Kampala. The regime is fully aware that an arrest warrant for the son is effectively a death warrant for the father's historical legacy. They are digging in their heels for a long, ugly fight. The internal system is currently being purged of anyone who displays even a microsecond of hesitation. The currency of loyalty has shifted dramatically. It is no longer about rewards. It is about pure physical survival. The message is clear: if you are not 100% with the dynasty, you are categorized as an enemy of the state. We have entered the scorched earth phase of autocracy, a dangerous point where the leadership decides that if they cannot own the nation, they will burn it to the ground and leave it in ruins. Ibrahim Traore grasps this dynamic better than perhaps anyone else on the continent. His speech served as a direct red alert to the youth across Africa. He is telling them, do not wait for some bureaucrat in Washington to sign a warrant before you claim your liberty. The only warrant that truly matters is the one stamped on the hearts and minds of the people. Traore's rapid ascent represents the ultimate nightmare for every hereditary ruler clinging to power. It marks the terrifying moment when the soldier realizes his rifle belongs to the nation, not to the general giving the orders. As the United States Senate ramps up pressure for the arrest of Museveni, they are inadvertently validating the very message that Traore has been broadcasting all along, that the old guard is a sinking Titanic and anyone foolish enough to stay on board is going to drag themselves down to the bottom with it. The political tension has now spiked to a fever pitch. Intelligence reports are surfacing regarding chaotic, frantic movements within the elite Presidential Guard Brigade. Dark whispers of a Plan B are circulating through the capital, a scheme involving a total internet blackout, a declaration of a state of emergency, and the suspension of the Constitution to bypass the 2026 election entirely. The general is done tweeting jokes and memes. He is now maneuvering chess pieces that involve cold steel live ammunition and real human lives. But as the regime scrambles to bolt the gates and fortify the palace, they have overlooked one fundamental truth of nature. You can lock a gate, but you cannot lock out the wind. And that wind of change, supercharged by the rhetoric of Traore and the mounting pressure from the international community, has already breached the perimeter walls. The terminal phase of this struggle is no longer centered on a single arrest warrant or a handful of frozen offshore bank accounts. It is now about the inevitable violent collision between a dying archaic past and an unstoppable demanding future. The crisis in Uganda has reached a critical point of no return, where that crown of bayonets is beginning to pierce the scalp of the very head that insists on wearing it. For decades, the Museveni dynasty operated on the arrogant assumption that the world's attention span was nothing more than a flickering candle easily blown out by the winds of the next breaking news cycle. They truly believed that the graveyard silence they imposed on the streets of Kampala would be mistaken by the international community for peace and stability. But the relentless courage of Bobby Kyagulanyi and the thousands of nameless young people who have vanished into those windowless drone vans have turned that silence into a deafening roar that even the thick marble walls of the US Senate can no longer ignore. We are watching the final desperate gasps of a political system that views human compassion as a defect and treats violence as the only valid currency of statecraft. There is a profound, righteous fury bubbling up, a realization that a nation with such massive potential, such vibrant youth, and such rich resources has been treated like a private family estate for over 40 years. We are witnessing a devastating irony in the history books tonight, folks. As the very icons who once stood on the front lines promising freedom have morphed into the architects of a new hereditary style of oppression. When you take a hard look at the streets of Kampala right now, the mood is heavy. And quite frankly, it is heartbreaking to witness the undeniable sense of regret washing over the city. We are talking about decades of lost potential election cycles where the people's voice was silenced, and the tragic reality of a brilliant young generation pushed into a corner, forced to decide between fleeing their homeland or rotting in a prison cell. Let's be clear about the so-called Museveni project. This was never a strategic roadmap designed to uplift the nation or serve the public interest. It was always a palace intrigue, a scheme for dynastic survival. But as the sun sets on the old establishment, there is a different kind of energy rising up from the Sahel region that is cutting through the darkness. Captain Ibrahim Traore did not simply walk up to the microphone to give a standard diplomatic address. No, he handed down a definitive judgment that is shaking the foundations of power. He put the entire international community on notice, reminding everyone that while Washington might issue warrants signed in ink, the true destiny of the African continent is being forged by the sweat and unshakable resolve of its citizens. Traore represents a pivotal shift, serving as the bridge, connecting the righteous anger of the downtrodden with the rising hope of a truly sovereign people. He has effectively proven that the era of the big man dictator is an obsolete relic of the past, while the age of the empowered citizen is fighting hard to take its first breath. Western sanctions might put the squeeze on the regime's bank accounts, but it is the awakening of the African spirit, the realization that dignity is not an import product, that will ultimately shatter these chains. As we wrap up this segment, keep in mind that this isn't where the road ends. Think of this moment as a seed being planted deep within the soil of your conscience. Every single story of human dignity and every declaration of sovereignty we cover is part of a massive harvest that is just waiting on the horizon. If you want to witness that harvest and stay ahead of the curve, make sure you are locked in with this network and following our coverage closely. We are not asking just to boost our ratings. We are asking because we are cultivating a dedicated space where independent voices are respected and narratives of national pride are given the spotlight they deserve. By tuning in and supporting this platform, you are doing more than just watching the news. You are choosing to march alongside us into the next explosive chapter of Africa's unfolding history. Let this broadcast be the path we travel together, a beacon of truth that we carry forward into an uncertain but promising future. Your support isn't just for us. It is an investment in the promise of what is coming next. So join the movement and prepare for a chapter that is already waiting to be written in 2026. The narrative that started with a raid on a home in Magare is concluding with the opening of 1,000 new doors of opportunity all across the continent. History is currently holding the pen and waiting for a signature. But let me tell you that signature is not going to come from some bureaucrat sitting in a distant foreign capital. It is going to be signed by the collective hand of a population that has made the bold decision that they will no longer accept the status of subjects. They have decided that from this point forward, they are the sole masters of their own destiny and the captains of their own fate. The so-called tweeting general might find himself trapped in a prison of his own design, but the young people of Uganda are discovering their wings and preparing to fly. The arc of the moral universe is indeed long, and even though it has been bent by the crushing weight of tyranny for 40 years, it is finally snapping back toward justice. Ibrahim Traore stands as living proof to the world that the current status quo does not have to be a life sentence for the people. His leadership serves as a stark reminder that the crisis in Uganda is merely one dark chapter in a much larger sweeping book of African Renaissance. As the sun begins to set on the Museveni era, we are not looking in the rearview mirror with bitterness. We are looking straight ahead with a fierce and unyielding hope, because this revolution is not just being televised. It is being lived out in real time in every single heart that refuses to kneel, because Traore has lit the torch and that fire is spreading across borders. So stand tall, stay vigilant, and never forget that the dawn of a new day never asks the night for permission to break.
Subscribe to Voice of Sovereign Africa today. Let's build a greater Africa together.